Hello and welcome dear students. Today we are going to discuss about administration under Mauryas. Before we discuss about the administration, let me briefly introduce you to the main objectives of today's lecture. To understand how the Mauryas governed their vast domain, to examine nature and functions of the central administration, to understand the role of different officials in the management of city and village administration, and finally, to understand how different types of resources were required for sustaining an empire. The Mauryan rulers are famous for establishing a vast empire through military conquests and annexation of conquered territories. Not less significant was the achievement of keeping this realm, which included almost the entire subcontinent, under the political control of a supreme power for at least a century. This speaks of an efficient administrative system that aided the Mauryan Empire's political integration. The Mauryan Empire was a vast geographical entity. To effectively govern it, various levels of administration were required. The administrative system is well described in the Arthashastra, Greek accounts, and Ashokan inscriptions. The empire was divided into provinces, each of which was under the direct governance of a prince or Kumara or a member of the royal family. The inscriptions suggest 4 such provinces. One in the south with its capital at Survanagiri, one in the north with its capital at Taxila, one in the west with its capital at Ujjain, and one in the east with its capital at Tosali. These governors were also referred to as Kumara in Ashokan inscriptions, implying a continuation of the tradition of appointing royal princes to these important positions. Senior officers known as Pradishkas were tasked with touring the empire every 5 years to perform audits and keep tabs on provincial administration. In addition, there were judicial officers known as Rajukas in both urban and rural areas whose judicial functions were frequently combined with revenue assessment. A well-organized administration was required for a variety of tasks, including surplus production, surplus extraction, distribution or expenditure, a strong army to conquer areas, tax collection from traders and agriculturalists, and so on. Now, let us talk about the Mauryan administration in detail. First, we will be talking about central administration. The central administration can be classified under the following categories, that is, the king, the council of ministers, city administration, army, espionage network, law and justice, public welfare. Now, let us discuss them one by one. First, we will be talking about the king. Even in normative texts, the king is given precedence. The king is regarded as the center focus of administration in Kautilya's Arthashastra. He had the authority to appoint and remove ministers, to defend the treasury and the people, to look after the welfare of the people, to punish criminals, and to influence the people through his morality. The Arthashastra states that the king's decision may override Shastric injunctions if it is found to be inconsistent with the latter. The texts specify certain characteristics that a king should have. These are being born into a noble family, being able to command kings and officials, having a sharp intellect, being truthful, and upholding dharma. He must be a skilled warrior as well as master all aspects of economic life and writing, that is lipi. Apart from that, the texts specify certain prerequisites that the king must meet. For example, he should give equal attention to all matters, remain vigilant, and active in taking action or corrective measures, always discharge his duties and make himself available to his advisors and officials. The Magadhan kings clearly followed these injunctions as evidenced by Megasthenes and Ashokan edicts. The paternalistic attitude of Ashoka towards his subjects contributed to his role as an ideal king. He was deeply concerned about his people's well-being, but he was also an absolute monarch. According to Romila Thapar, he took the title Devanampiya, that is God's beloved, to emphasize his close connection with divine power, even to point of excluding the intermediaries, the priests. This suggests that the king was also exercising his authority in religious matters. Next to the king was the Council of Ministers. A Mantri Parishad is mentioned in the Arthashastra and even in Ashokan edicts. The Arthashastra states that the state cannot function without the assistance of ministers. According to Rock Edict III, the Parishad was expected to ensure that the new administrative measures were carried out properly by the various council categories. Similarly, Rock Edict VI states that the ministers can discuss the king's policy while he is away, propose amendments, and make decisions on any important matter that the king has delegated to them. Nonetheless, the council was required to immediately report its decision to the king. The council's primary function was advisory in nature. In every way, the king's decision was final. The council placed a premium on majority rule. When the majority verdict was unfavorable, the king's decision took precedence. The qualifications for prospective ministers have been clearly stated. They should not be enticed by wealth, they should not succumb to pressure, and he should be a Sarvapadesh Shuddha, that is purest of all. There was also an inner council of ministers who were consulted on pressing matters. After the council of ministers, there was a city administration. Megasthenes makes several references to city administration in relation to Patliputra. According to this account, the city council was divided into 6 sub-councils or committees, each with 5 members. They were: the first committee was in charge of industry and crafts. It inspected such facilities and oversaw wages negotiations, among other things. The second committee was in charge of the foreigners. Its responsibilities included arranging for their food, lodging, comfort, and security. The third committee was in charge of registering births and deaths. The fourth committee was in charge of trade and commerce. It checked weights and measures, market, and so on. Fifth committee inspected manufactured goods, made provisions for their sale, and took steps to differentiate between new and used goods. Sixth, or the last committee, was to collect tax on the goods sold at a rate of 1/10. Though the Arthashastra does not mention such committees, but the functions associated with such committees have been discussed in the text. The Panaya Adhyaksha, for example, performed the function of the fourth committee. Suluka Adhyaksha was in charge of tax collection, which is the job of sixth committee, and Gopa was in charge of birth and deaths registration. Nagarika was the name of the city administrator. 2 subordinate officials, Gopa and Satnika, assisted him. Other officials mentioned include Banda Nagar Adhyaksha, who looked after the jail, Rakshi, who looked after the people's security, Lok Adhyaksha, and Suva Naika, officials who looked after goods that were manufactured in the centers. The city administration was intricate and meticulously planned. Penalties and punishments were imposed for a variety of offenses. There was no one above the law. Any wrongdoing by law enforcers, such as police, was to be punished. Similarly, citizens were punished if they were found to be in violation of the rules. Now, we will be talking about the military. The Kalinga War, Seleucus retreat, and descriptive accounts of the Mauryan army in Arthashastra all suggest that the Mauryas had a large army. Infantry, cavalry, elephants, chariots, transport, and an admiral of the fleet were all part of it. Both Greek and Indian literary sources mention mercenary soldiers in Chandragupta's army that was raised against the Nanda kings. Pliny describes Chandragupta's army as having 9,000 elephants, 3,000 cavalries, and 6,000 infantries. Poltrach's account referred to 6,000 elephants, 80,000 horses, 20,000 foot soldiers, and 8,000 war chariots. Kautilya also mentions a standing army with 4 major divisions: infantry, cavalry, chariots, and elephants. Each of these divisions was commanded by an official known as Pata Adhyaksha, Ashwa Adhyaksha, Ratha Adhyaksha, and Hastaya Adhyaksha respectively. Megasthenes describes a similar structure with 6 committees of 5 members, each in charge of the navy, equipment and transport supervision, infantry, cavalry, chariots, and elephants. There was also a provision for military medical services. There were also officials in charge of the production and maintenance of various armaments such as the Ayodhya Agra Adhyaksha. The recruitment policy, war plans, and fortifications are also mentioned in the Arthashastra. Officials and soldiers were compensated in cash. The salaries of army officers ranged between 4,000 pannas to 48,000 pannas. Now we will be talking about espionage. Arthashastra mentions a well-organized espionage network. The spies were supposed to spy on ministers and government officials, gather information about citizens' feelings, and learn the secrets of foreign kings. On urgent matters, they reported directly to the king. They not only went in disguise but also contacted barbers, cooks, and other people to gather information. The Arthashastra described a complex setup for these spies with 2 types, stationary and roving, which were then further subdivided into 9 types. The Samharta, the head of the secret service in the Arthashastra, was primarily responsible for revenue collection. Another task was to keep the king safe. In fact, the king's bodyguard was said to be made up of female archers who accompanied him on hunts. Women were also employed as spies by the government. Now we will be talking about justice and punishment under Mauryas. A well-organized legal system was in place to maintain social order, the smooth operation of the administrative system, and the flow of revenue to the state. The Arthashastra specifies a variety of penalties for various offenses. These included violation of marriage laws, divorce, murder, theft, adultery, wrong weights, and so on. There were various types of courts to settle dispute and sentence offenders. The Arthashastra lays out the judicial system in detail with reference to dharmasathas, that is the judges, and prajastris, that is officers responsible for suppression of criminals. Fines, limb mutilation, and even capital punishment were used to punish offense and crimes. The king was the ultimate arbiter of justice and the defender of dharma. Despite the rarity of the crimes, cases were decided by a body of arbitrators with a system of appeal to the king. According to Ashoka's inscriptions, the city Mahamatas were in charge of justice. The edicts call on the Mahamatas to be impartial and to ensure that no one is imprisoned or punished without adequate evidence. According to Rock Edict 1, the king would send a gentle officer, neither fierce nor harsh, on a tour of inspection every 5 years to ensure that this was done. Another important thing associated with the Mauryan period was the public welfare. As evidenced by his numerous edicts, Ashoka was concerned with the well-being of his subjects. During the Mauryan reign, a number of public welfare projects were undertaken. For example, the state considered irrigation to be of critical importance. Megasthenes mentioned officials in charge of irrigation. Water resources and irrigation methods were safeguarded, and anyone found causing harm was punished. The state encouraged people to repair dams on their own initiative in exchange for revenue exemptions. Sudarshana Lake was built during the reign of Chandragupta according to the Junagadh Rudramana inscription, which has been dated to 2nd century BCE. The government also built and repaired roads. Medical care and medications were made available to those in need. We have reference to various types of medicine men and ordinary physicians, midwives, and so on during this period. Ashoka urged that orphans and elderly women be cared for. Citizens were given protection from natural disasters such as famines and floods. As a result, the state invested a portion of its revenue in general well-being of its subjects. Now, we will be talking about district and village level administration. The village was the smallest administrative unit according to Arthashastra. A district was formed by a collection of villages and a province was formed by a collection of districts. Each district was to have an accountant who would keep records of boundaries, registered land and deeds, a population census, a livestock record, etc. Each district also had a tax collector who was in charge of various types of revenue. The village headman was the most important functionary at the village level, reporting to the district accountant and tax collector. At the district level, the officials listed were Pradishka, Rajuka and Yokta. Pradishka was the overall in charge of the district. Yokta was a junior officer who provided secretarial assistance to the other two officers. The officials mentioned were responsible for few tasks like land surveying and assessment, tours and inspections, revenue collection, and law and order enforcement. The king had direct contact with these officers at times. According to the fourth pillar edict, Ashoka granted the Rajukas authority to carry out certain responsibilities related to public welfare. Aside from that, each category of officials' powers were subject to check and balance. Gramika were the locals who were appointed as village officials. Then there was Gopa and Satnika, two types of officers acting as intermediaries between the district and village level administrative units. They were tasked with delineating village boundaries, keeping land records, recording people's income and expenditure, and recording taxes, revenues, and fines. Despite the presence of such officials, the village had some autonomy in running their affairs. The administrative system was primarily concerned with the efficient collection of taxes. According to Ashoka's inscription at Lumbini, there were two types of land revenue, Bali and Baga. The tax was assessed differently in each region, ranging from 1/6 to 1/4 of the land's produce. The peasants paid a quarter tax on their produce. They also paid a tribute. Land tax was the main source of revenue. It was levied at a rate of 1/6 of the produce. It may have been higher during the Mauryan period. According to Ashoka's Lumbini edict, during his visit to the Buddha's birthplace, he exempted the village from the payment of Bali and reduced the payment of Baga to 1/8. Another method by which the state obtained agricultural resource was sharecropping. Sharecroppers were provided with seeds, oxen, and arable land to cultivate. Such peasants donated half of their harvest to the state. Other types of taxes were also common. Peasants paid a tax known as Pindrakara. It was paid by husbandmen and levied on a group of villages. The villages also supplied provisions to the army as it passed through their respective areas. Then there was the Hiranya tax. Its nature is obscure and was paid in cash. Some taxes could have been optional. Pranaya, for example, was a tax that literally means gift of affection. Panini brings it up first, but Kautilya expands on it. It amounted to a third or a quarter of the produce depending on the type of soil. It could have become mandatory over time. Megasthenes also assumed that all land belonged to the king and that cultivators tilled the land in exchange for 1/4 of the produce as tax. Other Greek accounts, however, appear to indicate that the cultivators received 1/4 of the produce for tilling the king's land. We have references to crown land known as Sita, which was held by the ruler and designated as his personal property. These crown lands were farmed under state supervision by sharecroppers or tenant cultivators who paid taxes or even by wage labor. A Sita Adhyaksha or superintendent of agriculture is mentioned in the Arthashastra, who most likely oversaw the cultivation of Sita lands. The rest of the land in the Mauryan state, known as Janapada territories, was most likely cultivated by private farmers. The Jatakas mention Gahapatis and Gramabhojikas as having hired laborers, implying that they were land-owning gentry. The role of the state in irrigation provision was critical for a strong agricultural setup. The Arthashastra mentions a water cess which amounted at fifth, fourth, or third of the produce. Cess was only levied on irrigated lands in such areas, indicating that the state regulated irrigation facilities wherever rainfall was scarce. As previously stated, collecting land revenue through taxes was an important state function. The Samartha was the highest ranking officer in charge of this. The chief custodian of the state treasury was the Sanidhata. Because the revenue was also collected in kind. The state was responsible for providing grain storage facilities. Slaves and hired labor were provided by the Dasa Karamkaras. Wage labor, bonded labor, and slave labor were all types of labor according to Arthashastra. This summary of the Mauryan administration emphasized the establishment of a well organized polity. However, it is difficult to believe that the administration was run solely and uniformly in accordance with instructions issued from the capital by the highest level of political authority. The Maurya administration appears to have recognized local and regional variations that were accommodated rather than eradicated. The issuance of edicts in Greek and Aramic language and scripts specifically catering to local needs that could not be served by the use of Prakrit language and Brahmi or Kharoshti script best exemplifies the accommodation of local peculiarities. While concluding this lecture, we can say that the period between 325 to 185 BC saw the establishment of the first empire in the history of Indian subcontinent. Such a large empire required new strategies of governance. For the smooth governance of the empire, Mauryan rulers established a vast administration by employing intelligent governors and administrators. This complex system of administrative setup established by the Mauryan rulers became the foundational basis of the succeeding polities. Dear students, it was all about today's lecture regarding administration under Mauryas. Hope you have understood it well. See you next time with a new topic. Till then, take care and goodbye.